the original or the older HIPAA requirements and the new requirements introduced via later rules from the HITECH Act, Omnibus Act, and also recent and proposed changes that are coming soon. The focus is on how privacy, security, compliance, enforcement requirements have changed, and also what and how Microsoft can help you against this new landscape. Not only will we be focusing on the new HIPAA regulatory, but also to consider the new privacy requirements that are going to be associated with it, that's according to your state and local requirements. So the new key updates of HIPAA, right? We'll start with the major regulatory shifts. The regulation now includes high enhanced patient rights and mandatory technical requirements. A lot of organizations in today's day and age always try to meet those technical safeguards, but it's also the patient rights and that the custody of that information, of that flow of the environment, right? Then the HITECH Act impact is also the breach notification requirements and increased penalties for compliance failures. That's also a key area of component. The omnibus rule expansion is also the liability for the business associates for along the compliance framework. So it's your supply chain that's going to now be more involved with that component. And then also the 2024 proposed changes is more on shorter access deadlines, the more encryption variables, and the MFA mandates. As we continue, let's go a little bit further, right? The key differences at a glance. The key area is the faster accesses of 15 days proposed electronic copies required, streamlined. So prior to that, organizations can give that information in a certain amount of time. Now it's 15 days or sooner. The encryption is more focused on directly liable and stricter technical controls, right? Encryption in transit and at rest are now key with including of that. And then also the unauthorized access for breach, reportable stricter timelines. Each state will have their own requirements, the industry and your insurance requirements. And there's also going to be more tiered fines, up to $1.5 million, right? So this is where they're also evolving the penalties. When we're looking at patient rights enhancements, what does that mean, right? The reduced access time, where from 30 days down to 15 days, so they can have access to their records. So that's going to push organizations to move to a lot more of an electronic component, where that's the electronic delivery aspect. So that puts a little bit more burden on the organizations to ensure that they're meeting the requirements where they're producing those records in a timely fashion, but more secure. And they also the patient controls over their direct records from who accesses it. So if an organization outsources that information to other entities, they will also have to follow those guidelines and produce those chain of custody records. And also privacy notices. So the privacy notices are at the industry level of HIPAA. Then now states, local principalities, even at the federal level, insurance, et cetera, will now also include that language in that component and the consent requirements. So the enforcement mechanisms is where, as I said, it's going to be a tiered penalty structure up to 1.5. The expanded enforcement oversight of OCR and state attorney conduct audits and enforce compliance aggressively. Corrective action plans will be important to implement and also monitor and manage. And then, of course, the cybersecurity practice is important. So, adopting stronger cybersecurity practices beyond the HIPAA regulations. So it's no longer a checklist where it's a static requirement that, yes, you meet these. It's more of an ongoing component that you're going to have to be continuously managing and monitoring. And how you do it as an organization will determine your other requirements as well, not only just for HIPAA, but for the privacy, along with the other requirements that your organization has to follow. So how can Microsoft solutions facilitate your HIPAA compliance? We as a Microsoft, we can help you by giving you the tools and the technologies to meet and lessen that burden of compliance for you. Out the gates with Microsoft, we have a shared responsibility matrix. Everyone here has seen this, where the customer is responsible to a certain degree, and Microsoft, as your provider, and any other provider will meet you to a certain degree. And depending on the tools, the configurations will determine that risk level. And any gaps that you may have, well, that becomes a little bit more of a burden on the customer to ensure they follow that. But with Microsoft, right, we do have a BAA, Business Association Agreement for HIPAA. There is no separate signing that is required for this. It's done by default, that we will provide you the tools and the environment to help meet your requirements. The scope is a wide range of our services, including Office 365, Azure, Dynamics, our Power Platform, our Teams, and of course, our Copilot solutions. And the customer responsibility supports the HIPAA compliances, but they are responsible for their own compliance programs. That's that operational and organizational component of the governance to ensure that they're using our tools properly and it's being mapped to their requirements that they are needing to do to meet these HIPAA requirements and other regulations as well. You can access your BAA agreement from the Service Trust portal within your environment if you like to further to have on record. So as we go through, we have a solution called Microsoft Purview. And how can it be mapped to our HIPAA compliance? So with Microsoft Purview, that is one of our tool sets that helps you with the monitoring and managing of your data estate. So we start with our compliance manager. That is a very powerful feature and tool that gives you your guidance and your regulatory components of what you need to meet, those check marks against our tools and also operational and technical controls. Our IP&G, information protection and governance, that's how you're protecting the data when it's at rest, when it's at transit. How are you auditing and managing that component? To our risk management, that is where our insider risk program, our DSPM, and the other components that are needed to help mitigate that risk of the tools that are using in your environment against those requirements. And of course, discover and respond in an investigation or a request from a patient. How are you pulling that information of that user or users or that patient or whomever is asking for it in a compiled manner? Sometimes it can be done manually or more automated. And finally, of course, privacy management. At the end of the day, you are the custodians of that data, right? And you have to ensure that you are meeting the privacy requirements and the requirements that are set forth by your regulatory bodies. As we further down our security stack, our Microsoft XDR security platform, right? It's a unified threat protection that helps coordinate and prevent, and also from your endpoints to your identities, email, cloud data coming together, especially around EPHI. It's automated incident response to help you detect and contain, remediate threats quickly, especially with the breach notification risk mitigation requirements. And also the continuous monitoring and reporting that gives you the real-time dashboards and analytics to demonstrate the ongoing compliance and readiness for your audits. So you always want to be ready. And of course, it integrates with our Purview. So the DLP, the encryption, your compliance management also aligns within that tool. So it's a holistic approach. So it's not just one service or technology working together. It's several that helps meet or exceed your requirements. So there's some additional tools to also consider, right? Microsoft Entra, that's your identity management, the who and the what and the where and the why and the how. That will meet your HIPAA requirements and privacy, gives you the alerts and components. Microsoft Intune, you could create models and frameworks for your endpoint management from mobile devices to personal devices to workstations, iOS, Android, and beyond. This will be able to be to ensure that you're meeting your encryption requirements and beyond that to match their other requirements. And of course, you also have Microsoft Azure that meets the certifications that also gives you the access controls and beyond. Then, of course, we have Microsoft Priva, which helps you automate the discovery, protection, management, and assistance of patient data. And also that's your privacy flow. So whenever there's requests or consents, that helps you manage those requirements as well. So we're looking a little bit further into our compliance manager. What that does is connects your data solutions, bringing everything together for your Office security and compliance, your Azure security, Windows, and other documents and guides. So this is more of your GRC component that brings that component together. It gives you some telemetry of where there may be some gaps or some telemetry showing that certain policies are not in effect anymore or they're stale. So with having a proper governance of this tool, this can help you map to not just your HIPAA requirements, but additional. And I'll show you shortly of what that dashboard will look like. But the nice thing here with the Compliance Manager, it gives you ongoing risk assessment with actionable insights and simplified compliance. But at the end of the day, it's a collaborative tool where your entire organization can come together to work together from your legal to your HR to your different departments coming together to ensure you're meeting or exceeding your requirements for your compliance standards. So the product scope of our compliance manager goes beyond HIPAA. It includes ISO, NIST, FedRAMP, GDPR, etc. And there's a slew of others that I'll show you of the different components. Now, Our compliance manager focuses on Office 365, Azure, and Dynamics, but there are some additional capabilities for some connected resources from such other platforms, which we will discuss in a bit. But at the end of the day, it's basically creating a simplified compliance workflow across your different teams to facilitate that collaboration, to bring in that evidence, and also simplify your auditing. One of the other components that you all as an organization can use is our DSPM for AI. With AI being on the new forefront of everyone wanting to incorporate for that component, you as an organization have a determination to ensure that that data is always protected, no matter what AI platform you're using, from Copilot, ChatGPT, etc. And what is that information being transacted in? So with this tool, it's able to ensure that that data that you have protected, that you've been entrusted with, is being used in a correct way. Is it blocked or is it allowed? And where that flow of information is going to ensure that that information is not being leaked or getting outside of your control. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and show you my demo real quick. Let me know if you see the screen. As of right now, does anyone have any questions, comments, or anything I need to be clarified? Okay. So we'll start with our compliance manager. So when you navigate to purview.microsoft.com, you'll go up to your landing page of the home page. And I've pinned compliance manager to it to get easy access to it. So with the compliance manager, most of you have probably been on the before, or this is the first time you're seeing it. We've broken it out to certain key sections. One of the key areas I usually like to start off is in the regulation section. Here is where is the library and reference to a majority of your different requirements at the state level, industry level, and some international components. Now, some of it may not be applicable to you all, but you as an organization can narrow down. Since I'm in a resident of the state of Virginia, I could look at the Virginia requirements, for example. And this will tell me what I have to follow if I operate out of the state of Virginia in terms of the Data Privacy Act and the Breach of Information Act. So not only do I have to worry about a HIPAA, right, I also have to worry about these additional requirements at the state level. Now, every state has their own, right, and we can break that down. But today's focus, of course, is HIPAA. So I went ahead and loaded up our HIPAA assessment. And of course, NIST 853. It's a good reference to follow NIST 853, but also add on a HIPAA on top of that. But when you break down HIPAA, right, what does that really mean? So a lot more organizations are, it's around policy and procedure, right? And how is the technology helping it? It's pretty straightforward to a degree, but you have to look beyond that just as a checklist. This is more of an organic component that there has to be some kind of baselines and a reference, either through NIST CSP, best practices, NIST 853, 171, whatever that may be. And HIPAA is just something that goes on top of it. So that way you have an encompassing component that goes beyond that, right? We can't just look at it as a black and white where, yes, we meet these individual check marks, but when they come together, they may not work correctly or there may be additional gaps. But when we're looking at overview, right, the Microsoft breaks it down to different components. Granted, I'm using NIST 853 as a baseline and HIPAA on top, and that gives me a 62% score against the requirements. And if you look closely, some of the other components are failed at high risk, some are at none. What that is more the telemetry coming from your environment that says, hey, this is turned on, what has not been turned on, against these different breakdowns of the environment, where it's the governance of information, control access, management of devices, etc. This breaks down to the different components of the different technologies, from Entra to our security tools, from Intune, etc. This helps you understand of how to manage it and gives you that guidance. And if we bring up the improvement actions, it breaks it down in those different components. So if you have different teams managing it, this is where the collaboration comes in, where they can come in and configure the required mobile devices to use a password. You may already have that variable, but then you can go ahead and upload your evidence here to ensure that, hey, we have that check log, and you create that log of this has been done. But the nice thing here with the edit of the details is that once it's done, if it's implemented, not implemented, alternative, etc., you could do a transactionable date. And then, of course, the test and validation, you could go through, fail, passed, whatever it may be, but at least you create some logging of that component. But the nice thing here also is the evidence. This is where you have two options. You can link it to a special repository that you control for all of your tooling, or it's a third-party platform, whatever it may be, or it's an actual document. So that way, when you bring everything together, export it, it packages it all together to make the audit process and evidence to showing your leadership or whoever the stakeholders are that, yes, we meet these requirements, here you go. But it's also beyond that, right? There's more to it, but at least you have some guidance and some reference to move forward. And then as we go further into it, right, the solutions break down more into the other components of, the management of itself, right? That's that component. Of course, AI, or so on and so forth. Now, every once in a while, there are new updates that are coming out, right, from the industry that Microsoft will update, right? Having a good SDLC around this and management of this tool will help ensure that you're always ahead of, to ensure you're always in compliance. And then there's learning policies, et cetera. And of course, the reporting. The reporting feature really shows that detailed report of where you were and where you're going over that period of time to show if there's any poems or anything like that, that you're meeting your milestone dates by showing that proof of that telemetry to show whomever you need to. As we further go into the tooling of Microsoft Purview, Compliance Manager is just one of the many options of capabilities to help you lessen that burden of compliance. The next area is your DLP, data loss prevention. So what data loss prevention is overall, right? It's your data explorer, where your data sits, right? What type of data, wherever it may be. So we do have a template to help you understand the component of that, where you can basically create policies, right? Where you can create sensitive info types, custom ones, or at the end of the day, you basically create a general policy where we have created templates against that. Right now, there are two options, right? We've connected sources, where it's your 365 workloads, Teams, etc., or browser network connectivity. So you have some options for your cloud apps, etc. Depending on what policy you create, additional policies, one for each, but at least you have some more options and capabilities. And then since we're doing medical and health, we do have a HIPAA template that goes after business, insurance files, medical forms, code descriptions, full names, etc. And then, of course, you go through, name it however you want, right? And then your explanation, you can keep it a la carte. This is where you can assign admin units if you want to designate a special department or designate key stakeholders in each department that may handle this information, etc. This gives you that granularity for governance. And of course, where to apply those policies, right? From Exchange email, your SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, your devices, on-premise repositories, etc. Now, for the other option, you can add on additional capabilities with connected resources if you have third-party, on-prem, etc. This is where you can create more custom capabilities. And of course, there's more additional settings. So we'll choose, well, this is a demo environment. But as you go further down, you get to see you could turn it on in draft mode, read only, so that way there's not impacting, or however you want to do for the telemetry and just finish it. And then from there, the data loss prevention will give you a good insight of where you're at in terms of your HIPAA, right? Or your if you have other requirements, but also you could train your environment against those sensitive info types for HIPAA, privacy, etc., more granular. Then, of course, you have your data explorer, where is those data sitting, right? In this case, this is a broad range of credit card numbers, etc. But as we look down, we can start breaking those different components, and we can make it down where we say, let's say, health, right? And from the healthcare, this SharePoint site resides some healthcare information. Now, if we go a little bit further with retention, some other classifiers, this will break it down where those reside. And sometimes organization can run some additional tools that we have offering that you can see and investigate where anything's public facing or where it should be or whatever it may not. And then, of course, the activity explorer. What are they doing with that data? Are they printing? Are they uploading it? Where are they uploading it to, right? Is it controlled or uncontrolled? So this gives you that insight of that data estate. At the end of the day, with being the custodian of data, that change history is important to ensure that you're meeting the requirements, your users are aware from the bottom up to ensure that they're following the policies, procedures, but also unintentional or intentional exfiltration of that data. Another area of Microsoft Purview that I had mentioned was your DSPM for posture management. This is the landing page for that. So when you turn on your policies and procedures in terms of your DLP component, that will feed in some of that information as a baseline and some other components of your compliance manager, et cetera. What DSPM will help you ensure that are they uploading it to approved apps in AI like ChatGPT, Copilot, et cetera, or not, right? So this way you can garner and create that specific landscape for your AI utilization. So as an organization, it's recommended to create policy first and then procedure and then implementation of your AI. All right, those are the best practice steps to ensure AI is used in a correct manner, right? AI is here. We just have to make sure we govern it at the very beginning correctly. And DSPM is one of the tools that we offer that help you. Now, there are some additional capabilities and other tooling that we could go down, but I like to leave it very top level. But before I go hand it off, there's one other area that I like to bring up is the insider risk management. As we're talking about HIPAA data, right? There's always going to be multiple types of users. The users that are there that are sometimes they're focused and they're making sure that they're doing the right job, but they make a mistake, right? Then there are the users that are disgruntled that may want to take that information and profit off of it or use it against the organization. And then the third is the employees that are like sometimes not caring, they're just doing their job, but they're just doing it very mechanical, where they're just doing it and not really paying attention to the details. What insider risk management does and gives you the ability to is to look at that behavior. So if users are continuously touching specific data, that creates a trend in your environment. But all of a sudden, a user from another department or area of the business starts touching that data, this alerts the users or administration that govern this tool to say, why is that there, right? This gives you an insight of that behavior of that data access and management against your rules that you've already put in place. But it's usually a good foundation to use these tools collectively and they're independent of one another, but they can come together to give you a good landscape and posture to ensure you're meeting or exceeding your requirements for your regulatory and privacy requirements. Before I hand it off to my counterpart, Ashok, is there any questions or anything I can help answer or clarify? Okay. So I will hand it off to Ashok.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Habib. Thank you for providing a great overview on HIPAA compliance and how it's impacting a lot of organizations, not only government customers. So as we transition to our next section, so Habib, you kind of laid the ground that HIPAA compliance is about the scope, right? So, and there are different tools that needs to be incorporated to make sure that we have end-to-end visibility of the data and how we can reach out or respond to the audits. Now, then for the next section, I'll start with another tool from Microsoft, like a security portfolio, which is Defender for Cloud. And as Habib, you mentioned about Purview Compliance Manager and the tools and the DLP rules can help you on the M365 level assessment. Now, when HIPAA audit happens, there is a scoping for the other environments, like for example, the multi-cloud environment, Azure environment. And if I think about like your compute, SQL Server, containers, those are part of the HIPAA compliance as well. And how do you show up and how do you provide the assessment, right? So on that side, we have the tool called Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which is our cloud native application protection platform, or a CNAPP platform, which helps you to safeguard not only security and compliance in a multi-cloud scenario, and in a format that whenever you start with your cloud journey, you start secure, right? So that's the idea. And it's not only Azure, like you can have multi-cloud environment, and you can do a posture management. So basically it comes with around 500 out of box recommendations. It provides you the risk scoring, and you can map different compliance framework to those assessment. For example, going to the next section, so using Microsoft Defender for Cloud, you can assess or evaluate your compliance posture in your cloud ecosystem. For example, as you all know, audit can be tough because whenever you're doing audit, it has its own language, and whenever you are trying to provide the documentation and evidence, you have to basically translate those audit controls into your technical controls, and it takes time, it's difficult, and most of the time we end up doing in Excel or whatever, right? So that's why Purview Compliance Manager or Defender for Cloud comes with an automated way, which is a continuous assessment of your environment, and you always have an audit ready state where you can download the report and show up with your auditors with all the recommendations or with the evidences whatnot. Now this kind of gives you a good visibility into your cloud system, what's happening, what are the controls you are missing, and what are the recommendation and remediation to get those mitigated, right? So that's how Defender for Cloud compliance management or compliance posture is super important. Now as we are talking about different assessment, right? So Defender for Cloud comes with a basic Microsoft security benchmark, which is created from a lot of different compliance frameworks. But if you want a specific regulatory compliance, for example, NIST is always a guide, right? So NIST 800-53 or 800-171, SOC 1, SOC 2, CIS, or even HIPAA. So you can use those assessment just to evaluate your Azure or multi-cloud environment and making sure that you are deploying your SQL Server on Azure in a compliant way that HIPAA requires. Or if you need any specific vulnerability management solution on your servers that HIPAA regulation wants, you are basically doing that. So that's in a nutshell how Defender for Cloud will help you to evaluate your multi-cloud security posture. So let me go to my demo environment just to show you in action. Uh, if you are not familiar with Defender for Cloud, it's an Azure-based service that can be instantiated in your Azure environment, which starts giving you security recommendations, security posture, and workload protection across your Azure, AWS, and GCP environment. So it's a true multi-cloud solution. And when I say regulatory compliance, it comes with some of the regulatory compliance, which kind of gives you the score capability that you can evaluate your environment. So think about when I'm talking about Azure environment, right? So the workloads are different. So primarily, I'm talking about your PaaS instances, the platform as a service, your IaaS instances, your infrastructure as a service, and how you meet the regulatory compliance from HIPAA or anything. That's where it comes into picture. So I'll go to my another demo environment just to give you a little bit of more details closely. So now let's think about a scenario that you are being requested to create your Azure environment to meet the HIPAA regulatory compliance. Think about that's the problem statement that we are trying to address. Now you can play a role of a uh, governance body like GRC or something, or you can play the role of a SOC administrator or even infrastructure admin who has been asked to meet HIPAA regulations on the Azure environment. Okay, so how would you do that? So, and you are basically working with your dev team or application team or other deployment team who are actually deploying their workloads in Azure day in, day out. So they have some roles and responsibilities, some of the like permissions into the system, and they are doing that. But your job is to make sure each and every day, each and every hour, your environment is actually up to date in terms of HIPAA compliance, right? So let's try to tackle that problem. Now, think about I'm the IT admin, I'm managing my environment, and I would like to see how my environment is scoring in terms of Microsoft Secure Score or in terms of HIPAA regulations. So for that, in Defender for Cloud, I have regulatory compliance. This is like a standalone service over there which can be used. So I'll go into my regulatory compliance and I would evaluate my environment and think about you are being asked by the auditors to provide guidance, documentation, evidence. So you have a like hard job to do. So now, as you see, I can attach multiple different regulatory compliance, be it CIS, it's not only related to Azure, I can connect to AWS environment or whatnot. But for today's discussion, I'm kind of prioritizing HIPAA and high trust. So let's try to see what do I have in my environment. Now think about that HIPAA and high trust, this assessment behind the scene, there are numerous Azure policies are running in the background, and that Azure policies based on Azure resource management templates, it's pulling out information about your infrastructure. What are the servers you have deployed? What are the containers you are running? What are the storage accounts you have? And based on those policies, it's helping you to give you guidance on the HIPAA and high trust, how my environment is working. Now, if you are familiar with HIPAA regulations, I think you would know these are the controls families that you have. And if you expand them, it goes to the granular details about each control family, each control, and everything. Now, in a nutshell, I'm basically getting an assessment of my environment. By the way, out of this, all these controls, there are some failures, right? So I would try to go deeper into some of the controls and I would see why it's failing or whatnot. Now, one of the things which is very important, so you would see that there are control details. First of all, this platform actually mapping your regulatory controls, like whenever HIPAA comes into picture, they try to create those controls very generic. That kind of that's a one size fits all for all the organization, something like that, which is non-technical. Now, as I mentioned, it's often hard to translate those controls to actual technical controls, because when you are managing a virtual machine on Azure, you would not know what is the system security files, right? So it doesn't mean anything to you. But when I go into the control mapping that Azure is doing with the actual HIPAA control, now it makes sense to me. Basically, what it's telling that I have some of the virtual machines in my environment which is not meeting some of the audit policies, right? So, and I can go to my recommendation and it starts giving me some of the information back that I have a couple of resources which is having some low risk item and it's not meeting the audit policies that HIPAA needs, right? So this kind of gives me a little bit of idea what needs to be done, right? And as you see, this policies, they are running randomly, and the freshness interval is 30 minutes. That means if you remediate this particular control, it will immediately show up on the portal that you actually done that. So this is one of the examples, right? Now, I'll try to unpack few more. If you know, like technical vulnerabilities, right? So any audit wouldn't be successful until and unless you show up that you have a good vulnerability management solution. I've been part of FedRAMP audit. I've been part of like NIST audit. And every time the auditors show up, they would start with, okay, show me your vulnerability management posture. How are you managing the vulnerabilities on your servers? This is very common, and always the auditors would ask, right? So on that note, like I'm managing some of the servers in my Azure environment, and I want to know if I'm doing good job on the vulnerability management. So you can see that this particular technical vulnerability control is actually mapped to a technical control which Azure understands, and which kind of gives me the data back that, okay, by the way, I have out of 10 servers, 4 do not have a vulnerability management solution, or there are some vulnerabilities which needs to be resolved. So this gives me an idea that I have like 4 servers in my environment that I need to do in terms of vulnerability management. Maybe there is some CVE missing, there might be some patch missing, and as you see, this goes beyond your regular Windows server. You can find your Linux and everything. It's a true multi-cloud, multi-platform solution. So this kind of gives me that idea. Okay, I need to beef up my vulnerability management solution. This is one of the control that you would always be asked whenever there is audit happen. Similarly, you can go a little bit granular, like for example, the endpoint protection, right? So in endpoint protection, audit is a very important control, right? So I can see that there are some audit related controls failing on my environment. Why like that? So whenever you deploy any of the Azure service, by default, there are some diagnostic settings which can be enabled. And you can get the logs to your log analytics or any other SIM using Event Viewer. Now, auditors might not know those technical granularity, but they might ask you, okay, show your audit capabilities about all the resource type that you are deploying. Now, if you can showcase that, by the way, Azure is giving me those diagnostic logs, and I am storing them in a log system that I'm managing, that would help you pass. But as you see, maybe I have a lot of resources in my environment in terms of key vault or whatever, where I have not turned on those diagnostic settings. Now, again, this is how you show up to your auditors, because auditors would ask you those questions based on the control information. Like for example, just show me your audit capability, show me your monitoring capability, and they would try to evaluate backend through those control. Now it will be your job to showcase the technical story, right? So how you are doing. And when I'm talking about Defender for Cloud, this assessment template, it basically goes into that technical details, and it gives you those granular information so that you can prove to your auditors that, by the way, Azure provides me diagnostic logs. I'm capturing that, and I have a best practice managing those audit logs or diagnostic logs, which kind of will meet the requirement, right? So that's how you can see it goes very granular. And one of the thing is, for example, any control which is passing, right? So now there is one thing to highlight here. You can see that all the controls, there are two categories, MS versus C. MS means the controls that Microsoft is meeting for you, and C is the customer responsibility. I think you heard Habib spoke about the shared responsibility model. Now, as you're thinking about Azure, it's a shared responsibility model because Microsoft manages the data centers for you. Microsoft deploys those services and keeps them running on the Azure environment. But as a customer, you do have some roles and responsibilities, right? For example, if you want to know for HIPAA compliance related to this control 1202.09, the system monitoring, what's your control? So here you can see that there are controls which is given as automated or technical, which are based on the Azure policies, which is kind of showing you pass and fail. However, there are some manual controls that you need to do on your side, which is kind of documentation. Because as you are familiar with the audits, audit is all about how you document stuff, how you show the SOPs or procedures or evidence and all those things, right? So that's why this particular view I like it, where it's kind of giving me that what are the automated control that I'm meeting through Microsoft, or what are the automated control I have in my environment. By the way, there are some manual controls as well that I need to meet. And if auditors ask me, okay, show me the auditable events or review, update, or documentation, I can give those data point back. But you can see that how granular and how pervasive this solution is, so that it's basically an education for all the customers to be very clear about the technical and the audit requirement. And from not only that, it's basically giving you those automation where those Azure policies running behind the scene all the time and identifying your audit score and giving you the recommendation and guidance, right? So now, few other things very important. Now, for every audit, there is a report that auditors would look for. Okay, give me the evidence and whatnot. Sorry, I see Kyle has a question. Please go ahead. I see you're mute by default. Barry, do you know how can I get the question from Kyle. Maybe
Let's see. Hold on for 1
que-
second. Let me see if I can unmute everybody. Hold on. I don't think they are muted by default. Hold on. Second. Sorry, Ashok.
no worries, all good.
Let's see. Yeah, they're not all muted. Let me try to mute all and then unmute again. Okay, now I've managed to mute them all. Let me unmute them. Kyle, can you give it a go? Let's see, it shows a mute button. Hold on.
Or maybe if there is a question that can be posted on the channel that
Yeah.
Barry, you can read me
Yep.
maybe once I close it. Okay.
Apologize.
Okay.
Kyle,
No worries.
go ahead and put your question in chat, please,
Okay.
if you can.
And I'll get back to you. And Barry, I'll read me the question once I'm done.
Okay.
Cool. So moving along, you saw that I can go through the technical controls of HIPAA and identify what are the gaps in my environment, and as it's giving some of the recommendations to meet as well. Now there are few aspects of audit. Auditor would always ask for a evidence or report, right? So uh, this HIPAA template can be downloaded in a PDF or whatever format. And one of the things is very important. I'm sure a lot of you are actually managing multi-subscription environment. And as I keep repeating, audit is all about scope, right? So if you have multiple subscriptions, so with this filter, you can choose all subscriptions, or if you want to get the report from a specific subscription, you can do that. But it'll give you a very good report in a PDF format, which has the number of controls tested, number of controls passed, number of control failed with the date and time. So in audit world, date and time of the evidence is super important and critical. So that's why this audit report can be helpful. Now, a few other things. You might be wondering how to turn this on, right? So this regulatory compliance feature is from Defender for Cloud posture management. We call it CSPM or Cloud Security Posture Management. By default, you have a foundational CSPM turned on, but specifically about the controls that I showed, HIPAA template, NIST template, you would need the Defender CSPM. So that can be turned on for your environment. And once you do that, you have loads of security policies that can be implemented. For example, there are by default, a lot of policies are already available out of shelf in your environment. Like I showed you HIPAA. Similarly, you can do NIST 800-53 revision 5, which is the latest. There are other compliance framework as well out there that you can be used. But this is where you can use them. Now you want to create something on your own. Definitely, because those policies are given, you can always create by your own. For example, if I try to go into HIPAA and HITRUST, I have all the policies which is running behind the scene, or the Azure policies that I'm talking about, right? And it's there are manual, audit oriented, so you have all the details. So it's nothing black box to you. If you want to change, update something which might not be customized for you, you can always do them. So that's one way how you get them activated on your environment. Next thing is you want to see how it's running behind the scene, right? So we will give you the raw query and you can always modify and get the result back. So you saw the fancy dashboard on the portal, right? So basically it's running bunch of KQL queries behind the scene. And if I run that, it'll give me the raw data back. So you might be technical and you want to play with the data, you want to get the data in Excel and do something else, you have everything out there. So this, as you see, those controls running behind the scene, and it gives all the data back where you can work with the data and see the details, how it's populated, and what are the resource type, resource name, everything. So it's very customizable on your need. Now, one of the other feature which is very important, oftentimes we have to show the progress. So whenever you are working on a compliance project, So date and time and like a periodic progress is very important. So on that note, there is a workbook which is available in Defender for Cloud. We call it compliance over time. So that means like how are you improving on your compliance? So I have been taking all these bits into my log analytics workspace. That's one of the requirement to get this data. I'll select my subscription and I'll select the standard, and it'll give me a result back how I am progressing weekly on the HIPAA compliance. So as you see, I'm not doing great in last 7 days or 30 days change. Technically, I did not update any of the controls or did not remediate anything. So my control score is not great. But if I want to know a little bit of more details around that, so it kind of goes a little granular onto each and every control, how I'm progressing, and it gives you a good score. So this is another something you can use it just to track your progress. I don't think this would be required for your auditors, but if you want to show progress to a leadership that over last month you have made progress on your HIPAA compliance, this is one way to do that. So that's one of the ways you can like streamline your security. Now, another aspect I would like to talk about in HIPAA compliance, permission management is extremely important because, as I mentioned, like for any audit, vulnerability management is one of the first questions that they would start. Another one in the cloud world, they would always inquire, how are you managing the permissions in your environment? So, and when you're thinking about managing your multi-cloud environment, it's always all over the place because sometimes you provision over permission, or sometimes there are unused permissions or whatnot. So for that, there is a feature from posture management which is called permission management, or the Gartner term is cloud infrastructure entitlement management. So what it does, it basically gives you two nuggets for you: how many over provisioned identities you have in your environment, and how many unused identities that you have in your environment. Maybe I'm more interested to know how many over provisioned identities on my environment. I want to get a little bit of more details about that. So as I do that, it kind of starts going back behind the scene. It will try to validate all the identities, service principal names, and everything that is attached to my environment, and start querying what are the permissions that I have. As you see, it kind of gives me a recommendation report, which kind of tells me that, okay, Azure over provisions identities should be, I should mitigate some of those permission gap. And it gives me the resources, not only the identities, the service principal names as well. Like for example, if I go to one of the details, it's related to one of the automation account that I have, which seems to have more permission than required. And as you see, it kind of gives me some of the good score. One of the terminology I would like to highlight is PCI, or permission creep index. So that means you can see that this particular attack, this particular automation account or service principal name has a high PCS score. So that means it gives me the details that maybe I need to review the roles and permissions and try to resonate what are the roles which are unused versus what are the roles which is used. And then I can start questioning this particular service principal name, which is an automation account for me. Do I need all the permission? And sometimes auditors are not that technical, but they kind of ask you those random questions, which would be kind of curveball to you, and it kind of disrupt your audit because you want to show that you're managing your security posture with a lot of rigor, and you are doing all those things. And sometimes this permission management or service principal names can be a curveball to you. Similarly, the last thing is in the cloud world, the most important thing is the attack paths, because once you are done with the audit, maybe the auditors would ask you some random questions. Okay, how do you manage the attack path? What are the risk in your environment, right? So in Defender for Cloud posture management, so there is a feature called attack path analysis, which kind of gives you overall attack paths in your environment. For example, you see on the screen, I have a virtual machine, which is a Linux server, which is accessible over the internet through a public IP address. And maybe sometimes this storage account, this virtual machine would have access to a storage account with sensitive data, or having a managed identity to access a key vault and all those fancy attack path. But this is how it gives me on my environment, are there any vulnerabilities which is kind of causing a higher attack path to get into my system. And auditors kind of loves those perspectives just to make sure that you are actually managing and mitigating the attack surface or reducing the attack surface on your environment. So this is another good way to evaluate your environment in terms of attack paths, and kind of demonstrating the auditors that, by the way, in my whole environment, maybe I have a bunch of recommendations, but I have only one attack path that I need to reduce, right? So that kind of gives you confidence in your environment, just to make sure that you are doing good job managing your multi-cloud environment. So as I kind of summarize this, you see, audit is difficult. And whenever you're managing audits through your Excel book, it can be extremely cumbersome. So we have to automate. We have to see how we can use tools and features and functionalities. As Habib started with how Microsoft platform can be used in terms of Purview, Entra, Defender or XDR. So Defender for Cloud is one of the tool which is which can be super helpful managing your secure posture of your cloud and multi-cloud scenario. So with this, I conclude my session on this particular topic. Barry or Habib, please add if you want to have any last comments. And I would love to take the question that I was kind of hearing that Kyle had.
Kyle, I think cannot see if you can come off mute, but I think it's
I
not
can
available.
now. Thank you. Sorry,
Awesome,
I
thank
wasn't
you.
able
I
to
saw your
before.
email as well, but please ask the question and to us all.
Yeah, sure. So I was just kind of, and then maybe this is a good wrap-up question. I was just wondering like how the Purview functionality and the Defender for Cloud kind of map onto each other. Like, is Purview does the telemetry and like tells me where the data is, and then that's fed into Defender like into the assessment, so I know which controls are compliant, or how does that work?
Great question. Excellent. Glad you asked. So, Habib, you can add little color commentary on the Purview, but let me start on the Defender for Cloud. So, as I started, Defender for Cloud is the CNAPP solution, like a cloud native application protection platform. And as you see the scope that I'm covering, it's the Azure, AWS, GCP, mostly your cloud native scenario, primarily your IaaS and like PaaS scenarios. Now, whenever you're thinking about Purview, it has some of those capabilities to go into your multi-cloud environment, but primarily Purview helps you on your Office 365 stuff, like your SharePoint, your OneDrive, looking through the assessment templates. So now the delineation is whenever you're thinking about your Azure, GCP, or AWS system, and you want to apply regulatory assessment, you want to validate that, okay, how is your SQL on Azure is doing in terms of security compliance? Is it meeting the regulatory compliance that HIPAA might require? For that, those kind of scenarios, Defender for Cloud is a perfect solution for you. Hope that makes sense. Habib or Barry, do you want to add anything on the Purview side?
Super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle, what I would do is, Ashok is a more technical resource than I am, but the way I look at it is, Purview really encompasses both, data and resources outside of your M365 environment, as well as their Purview licenses that you purchase for whatever 3 years, 5 years, et cetera, conventional licenses that provide the GRC concerns for your M365 environment. So we do both. Ashok in covering Defender for Cloud is really more so the non M365 environment. There is linkage, but the point is that Purview with Defender for Cloud collectively covers both your M365 as well as non M365 environment. I hope that kind of helps a little bit.
Totally. So if we're running like other apps inside our environment, Purview would be helpful for that as well.
Yeah, Ashok, how would you answer
Yep.
that in terms of the other apps, or Habib?
Yeah, I think that let's kind of delineate. Anytime you're thinking about your SaaS-based application, which is connected to your Entra ID, Purview would be the way to go to the solution. And whenever you're thinking about your IaaS and PaaS, like for example, you're standing up a virtual machine, you are spinning up a SQL server, you are spinning up a Kubernetes container, or even Azure OpenAI service in Azure. In those scenarios, Defender for Cloud is way to go.
Yes. And then also cross cloud, just to also remember, Purview does let you with any connected resource, connected like not even non-Microsoft, so AWS, GCP, etc., Salesforce, that could also be intertwined with that. So you can see the lateral movement and the landscape holistically. So you're looking at the defensive perimeter, the outer perimeter, and then also Purview comes in for that lateral component working together.
Super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a really good differentiation and also emphasis that Habib just mentioned. Obviously, we're Microsoft. Obviously, our public cloud is Azure, but Defender for Cloud is a multi-cloud tool, right? So again, AWS, GCP as well, cross-cloud.
And then I would
Oh.
recommend working with your providers as well, like beyond that, right? So if you're using like Epic, Athena, some of the biggest EMRs, see what connectivity they have with our solutions, and you'd be surprised on how much they've worked with us to make it work, right? So that way you can make that to an extension and pass some of that burden onto those platforms with some of the new modern integration that they have rolled out to lessen that burden of compliance on the customer or the end user, as they also have to follow the new HIPAA guidelines, just like we do, et cetera, to provide these tools to help lessen that burden. So, but if working together holistically and not pillar, will make you achieve and exceed some of those compliance requirements for you all.
All right, everybody, we're at time. Thank you so much for joining today. For those of you that have not joined us over the last couple of years, we are always focusing on Purview. We focus on state and local government as well as higher education. And we do this every month. So our next session is planned for, it's every Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific. And it's usually the third or fourth Thursday of the month. So that looks like the 27th of November. It looks like our tentative topic right now is going to be Purview again, but we are adding features and changing some of our billing. So more on Purview in terms of how things are changing and the billing process. So please do join us. And as a community member, you will automatically receive the invitation in your inbox for these meetings. Any last minute questions before we break away for the day? All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to Habib and Ashok. And once again, thanks all for joining us today. Have a great rest of the week. Oh, there's a question. Did somebody have a question? Somebody raise their hand? Nope. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Take care.